Okay, with the new mold material I got that Lewis mentioned to me, a lot of the guys are using that are cutting custom molds. I've just been using gray cast iron, and I decided to try this ductile cast iron, 65 45 12. It was by Durabar, Versabar. What I bought was Versabar, and I think it's just a manufacturer, um, you know, handle for the stuff. It should be the same stuff, 65 45 12. It should be the same composition. So I decided I was going to try and cut the Lyman Snover bullet. Found a picture of it in 41 caliber online. Didn't have any dimensions on it. So what I did is I took a screenshot of that picture. I zoomed it in, and then I used my calipers and I zoomed it as big as I could get it on my screen. Then used my calipers, measured everything on it with my calipers, wrote them all down, and of course the dimensions were huge, much bigger. Then I did a simple equation to shrink it down to 45 caliber, and I actually cut this mold at 0.456, and I'm hoping with shrinkage that it'll drop a 452 bullet. I found with 50 calibers, it's about 5 thousandths that you need to add. So I added 4 to the 45 caliber. I'm just getting ready to pull it out of the lathe. Haven't pulled it out of the lathe. This was probably the scariest mold I've ever cut, just because of the length of the nose on the thing. My nose cutter, when I bought my big lathe, somebody had this homemade tap made out of drill rod. So I screwed up the first cutter. I used a crappy milling bit to mill it in half, and absolutely, I don't know if the bit caught, grabbed, just exactly what, but it smoked it, completely destroyed it. So I had to go back to the drawing board, and I didn't have a piece of drill rod left big enough to make the new nose cutter. So dug around in my toolbox, found this guy, and cut the nose cutter. There's a picture of that on the post, on Modern Muzzleloader under new mold material, which is where this video is going to be placed. Had some clearance issues with this thing. You can see where I had to grind some relief there, and then I had to grind the crap out of the back of it. I put some layout fluid on it. Still had a little bit of I think that's where I clearanced it the last time. So it kind of rubbed on the lands on the lube grooves. Well, the narrowest part of the bullet where the lube is going to go. So I was originally going to cut those at 391 is what it scaled out. I ended up having to go to 395 to get the rub marks out. And it rubbed on the first couple of them before I caught that I was rubbing and corrected that. So only 456 to 395 is 61 thousandths. So the lube grooves are still 30 thousandths deep, which should be plenty. So let's pull this out of the mold, or out of the lathe, and clean it up. And I marked the jaws so that if this thing is not what I want, then we can rebore it. So let's take some carb cleaner and just clean this thing up. Try and get all the layout fluid off of it. And we're going to open it up together right here. It's supposed to have a rounded nose. I hope there's not a little flat on it. If there is, I'm not too worried about it. And looks like it turned out pretty dang good. Oh yeah, I like that. I think that's gonna shoot pretty well. It should weigh in about 455, I think I figured. It looks a lot bigger than that. Looks like it's going to weigh in closer to 500, but judging off from the 41 caliber, once again, I just did a ratio to, based off of diameter. It didn't account for really length, so I don't know where it's going to fall in terms of weight. It looks like it's going to be closer to 550, 600 grains than 450 grains. But when you did the ratio off the caliber to weight, it came in at 455, but it looks like it's going to be much heavier than that. So, a big, long, should have a good ballistic coefficient, good long range bullet for 45 caliber muzzleloader. So anyway, happy with how that turned out. And we'll finish cutting all the grooves and threading for the handles and all that stuff at a later date. Right now I got stuff to do. I got to get busy. So when I pulled this out of the lathe, you can see there's some tooling marks in the nose of that. You're going to get that whenever you're using a big cutting surface, and the cutting edge on that tool was 450 thousandths long. So, it's essentially scraping, planing rather than cutting. So you're gonna get some tooling marks, and they're not bad. They're, a couple thousandths deep at the most. They may not even show in the nose of that bullet once it's cast. I'm not really paying attention to them. It bothers me that they're there. I can lap them out. But I probably won't, because they're probably not going to show in the bullet. One of the other things I noticed about this was my straight section, and I knew it was going to be off. It's a little bit longer, about 30 thousandths. I just tried to measure it, and as close as I can tell from about there where that taper starts to the straight section, I was 230 thousandths. And when I scaled that, I came out with that dimension being 200 thousandths. But in the middle of making this cutter, the nose cutter, I had to stop and resharpen my tool that I cut that with. And I knew that was going to change things, but I was too far into the cutter, and I limited pieces of drill rod, so I went with it. So anyway, that was another thing I noticed. And then when I figured the equation to figure the weight of this thing, I screwed up royally there. The regular Snover bullet's a 410 diameter, weighs 400 grains. So 410 over 400 is equal to 452 over X. If you solve for X, 452 times 400 divided by 410 would equal X. X came out to 441 grains, 440.98 exactly. To have been accurate with that, I would have needed to know the volume of this 400 grain bullet and the volume of this 452 grain bullet. Then I could have solved for X and got the correct number of the weight right here. As it is, I stated earlier I thought it was going to weigh about 450 grains. Here's a 444 grain bullet. It's been dropped a couple times. Sitting in there, you can see quite a bit of nose left. I would guess at least 100 grains, maybe more than that. So I think this thing's going to weigh in around 550 grains or so. It's going to be a beast for certain. Should have a pretty high, as far as black powder projectiles go, should have a fairly high ballistic coefficient. And should be a good long range bullet. So anyway, got to put the slots in, tap for the handle, pins, sprue plate I got to build, Drilling the sprue plate stop. There's still 3 or 4 hours of work here to finish this thing up. But right now I've got ductwork I've got to get built, finished built. So anyway, till I get it finished, there we go.